Let's start the hour with NBC's Steve Patterson in Utah. Also with us, former chief of D.C. Homeland Security, Donell Harvin, and MSNBC legal analyst and former U.S. attorney, Barbara McQuade. Steve, what more are we learning about the suspect's personal life?
Yeah, we're learning a whole lot more about the investigation and the personal life because Utah Governor Spencer Cox is speaking out a whole lot more about the investigation, making the rounds on the Sunday talk shows this weekend, including to our own Kristen Welker. The headline, though, you already mentioned it. The fact that apparently, according to investigators, Robinson is not cooperating with the investigation. He is not speaking to investigators. He's relying heavily on his Fifth Amendment rights, which is a counter to what we've heard from the governor about the suspected shooter's roommate. First of all, that the governor saying that there appears to be a romantic relationship between Robinson and the roommate, somebody that identifies as transgender, transitioning from male to female, but that roommate is counter to Robinson cooperating with the investigation, is speaking to investigators, was shocked to learn about the shooting and the fact that Robinson is considered a suspected shooter in this case and somebody that has been from minute one, essentially. The governor also saying a little bit more about Robinson, that just a few years ago, this was somebody that was considered a normal kid, a college student, highly intelligent, socially polite, but that over the next few years or so, he had become more and more politically motivated to the point in which the governor used the word radicalization. Somebody that was terminally online, that was really steeped in his internet meme culture, something the governor described as a darkness. Meanwhile, you played it. FBI Director Kash Patel on Fox this morning talking about some of that matching evidence. The screwdriver found on the roof apparently had DNA on it, which matched the towel also having DNA on it, which was used to wrap that bolt-action high-powered rifle that authorities recovered. Also, talking a little bit more about the digital footprint, so key to the investigation and the revelations that may come from that. I want to play for you what he said about that. Listen to this.
He had a text message exchange, the suspect, with another individual, in which he claimed that he had an opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and he was going to do it because of his hatred for what Charlie stood for.
Robinson, of course, being held in the Utah County Jail. We should have many more details tomorrow with those formal charges and the first court appearance. Anna?
So, Barb, with the FBI director revealing the DNA match and some of these other evidence that has been collected, he says he's all about transparency. The suspect, of course, has not been charged yet. Is it problematic for the head of the FBI to be putting all this information out there?
You know, Anna, it's as if you saw my head exploding while I was listening to his comments. It's absolutely inappropriate for him to be making these comments. Not only should someone neither confirm nor deny the existence of an investigation, you know, in a case like this, it's obvious that they're investigating and they should to be assuring the public. But to detail the evidence is contrary to regulations that govern the practices of the Department of Justice. That's because when you share the results of evidence, you can violate the due process rights of a defendant and jeopardize their right to a fair trial. Maybe Kash Patel doesn't care about his rights to a fair trial, but he should be caring about the success of this prosecution and investigation. And so it does tee up a potential motion for the defendant to use these words against Kash Patel as a suggestion that he would be denied a right to a fair trial. Now, I don't think any judge is going to dismiss this case based on what is likely to be the strength of the evidence, but it could result in a change of venue or other kinds of complications that you just don't need. So I would ordinarily say this is amateurish. Maybe that's what it is. But it also seems like it is more about driving a political story than a sound criminal investigation.
Donell, where do you see the investigation focused right now, based on what we know, and what do you see as the key pieces of evidence?
Well, clearly what your last commentator said, it was spot on. I mean, this individual is being tried in the public courts, and that's going to perhaps bring issues later at jury selection and trial. But that aside, really what they're looking right now is the online footprint. You mentioned some leakage, what we call leakage. That means this individual had shared with other people, either online or in person, and this is what the FBI is kind of drilling down on, their intent. and whether individuals reported that or withheld that information or possibly even enabled them, which could lend themselves to being open to some type of liability in terms of providing, some type of material support. And so they're looking at that. They're looking at, erased text messages or any type of emails that may be able to be gleaned from electronic devices to really paint a picture of not only do we have the right person, but are there any other individuals in this person's orbit that may have been part of this plot?
So let's pick up on that, Barb, because Director Patel did say that they're interviewing dozens and dozens of suspects and subjects. So could others be charged as well?
It is possible. I think, there are a couple of things going on here. One is it is important to see if there's anybody else out there who might be involved. And if so, perhaps charges could be appropriate. Accomplice liability, aiding and abetting, conspiracy, and the like certainly would be something they want to explore, especially if there's anyone out there who poses a threat to public safety. I think the other part of this investigation for motive is, the intelligence of understanding how this happens so that there can be some prevention efforts in the future. But also, to the extent federal authorities are considering prosecuting this as a hate crime, they would need evidence of that motive. And so that could be obtained through those interviews with other people, through things that were written on social media.
He has a court appearance tomorrow, the suspect does. What do you expect in that court hearing? What more could we learn?
My guess is it's going to be pretty quick. Usually a court appearance is what's called an initial appearance. A person is told that they're charged with a crime. They are asked if they need court-appointed counsel, and a detention hearing is held. I can't imagine that in a case like this, Mr. Robinson is going to be released because he likely poses a danger to the community. I think there will also likely be examinations of his mental competency. And that is really just a question of whether he is able to understand the charges against him and assist in his own defense. Later, there could even be an examination for insanity, but we're not at that stage just yet.
Danelle, Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA, we know, is planning a massive memorial for Kirk this Sunday at Arizona's State Farm Stadium. Now, this is not an open air space, but what do you expect for security, especially with President Trump expected to attend?
Security will be high. Emotions are clearly high. There's a lot of people mourning, but whoever's running the security shouldn't take their eye off the ball in terms of making sure that everyone that enters that place is safe. I mean, we have, as the last recent history has shown us, a lot of very sick people out there who are intent on violence. They're radicalizing online. They're mobilizing to violence. They have these grievances. And so I think security will be key, but it's not just this event. It's other events that happen that may be smaller that we have to look at as well.
Barbara, the president said yesterday that he's looking at names of foreigners who celebrated Kirk's murder after the State Department suggested pulling their visas. Several Department of Defense workers have already been let go because of their social media posts. Is this a free speech issue, or are there limits on what people can say online?
Well, at the moment, there are not limits of what people can say online. I mean, I guess I'll put a caveat on that. People cannot communicate a threat to harm or kill another person. But simply saying ugly, hateful things is permissible. Now, if you're a private employer and you think that when a person says things that are hateful and despicable and they reflect poorly on your organization, then that person could be fired. For example, if somebody were to say in a media organization something that was ugly or dark, that media organization could say, we don't want to be affiliated with you because you represent our brand. But to the extent it's a government person, government action cannot be retaliation for First Amendment protected speech. And so if someone works in the government cannot charge someone with a crime or take action in retaliation against that person for exercising First Amendment activity, First Amendment protected expression, even if that statement is repugnant.
Steve, Kirk's wife spoke out this weekend. What's her plan to continue Kirk's work?
Yeah, Erica Kirk speaking this weekend from a podium in Arizona. It's so striking because she's standing next to the chair where Kirk used to host his podcast, speaking to millions of supporters, as we saw the streaming numbers online, saying, well, first of all, calling her husband a martyr, saying that not only will the movement that her husband started continue, it will be stronger than ever, vowing to continue the tour dates that Kirk was on, vowing to continue the podcast that Kirk used to host with J.D. Vance, vice president, saying that he will host the podcast in just a matter of hours today.